Good morning, Lessa, and let me say that it is an absolute pleasure to be here with you this morning. The Quilting School of South Australia has a pretty long and interesting history, and I have to say that you've been an integral part of it since the very early days. You and I were on a couple of the early exec committees. I can remember actually succeeding you as workshop convener, and the real irony is that you taught most of the workshops back then.
It was not a good look, really.
No, I think you were very influential in shaping so many of our quilting journeys. We learnt our foundation skills from you, and I know that you taught both in the city, out in the country. You were one of the very first tutors, I think, who probably taught interstate as well. But how you came to be our guru of the time is an interesting story. Do you want to tell us about the impact of your sister, Helen,
yes.
and your visits to her?
Well, I have a sister who has lived overseas for 50 plus years, and she and I are still very close, and we have always had the same interest. She's a quilter, I'm a quilter, but we started in the 70s with a baby quilt for our first son. Then I think I signed up for a hand quilting class called American Quilting at a Panorama. I certainly wish I knew who the teacher was, but I've no idea now, because she was the one that started me. So on the weekend we drew around templates and we had to stitch on the line, and we cut it out a bit wider.
Okay.
And she also showed us cathedral window, and that was different to everyone was only doing hexagons at the time.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, that's different, I'll do that. And so I just jumped straight into this huge queen size quilt, which when I finished it, we couldn't sleep under, it was too heavy, and we had to lift it off every night. The fabrics in it were anything, because even seersucker, I see some of the windows, because there were no quilt shops, and people like farriers had their winter fabric in the winter, no summer fabric. Until I found this place down the west end of Adelaide that made clothing, and I could get their scraps, and that kept us going through the. And then my sister wrote and said, I've just done a quilt by machine. So the next time I went to visit, she signed me up, and I did. Quilt in a Day with Eleanor Burns. And Eleanor Burns is the reason for my wonderful next 40 years. This was in the late 70s. In fact, the front cover of inside the front cover, it shows how you rip the fabric then.
Yes, I remember that.
Luckily, very shortly after that, these new tools came in, the cutting mat, but perspex rulers. So I used to teach basket making at Mitcham Village, which is a centre for all sorts of craft. But when I came home and told them people about my log cabin, they all wanted to do that. So we were just going to have one class. And I went to Mr. Menzel's in the city and had him cut some 2.5-inch strips of perspex. And we had one board and about 2 cutters to cut all the strips, and off we went. And Mark Russell was in that class. That's when I first met Mark Russell. And then those ladies had sisters, aunts, mums who wanted to learn patchwork. So it very, very quickly grew to a weekly class and then a twice weekly class. And it hasn't stopped, because that class I started, I taught for 15 years. Then Faye and Joy took over for the next 15 or 17 years, and now Rachel runs the same thing, and I'm a student in Rachel's class now.
It's a wonderful legacy, Lessa. It's a wonderful legacy.
Well, a lot of the people are the same people are still in it, that have been in from a long way back.
And I think that is part of the quilting family. It's not just about the learning, It's about that sort of fellowship, friendship, and
it's
that is so important.
It's the social thing more than anything else. I say quilting has taken the place of the mothers' union or the church guild that used to meet and do lots of charity work, and now our quilters do the same thing.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Mm.
In fact, it brings to mind that if I had to come up with a string of adjectives to describe you, one of the words that would come to me very quickly is compassion, because you are incredibly, I'm struggling to think of the word, incredibly sensitive to the needs of others in a general sense, but you're also really responsive to opportunities for those who may be at a bit of disadvantage and need financial support.
Yeah.
And I go back to when your mum was in care. You had regular, were they annual or
Annual. Yeah.
You opened your home and your garden, and you had quilts everywhere.
Yeah.
And was it tea, coffee, scones, I think?
Yes, tea, coffee and scones.
Yeah. And that was, the Guild had exhibitions at the time, but your exhibitions rivaled the Guild exhibitions. I mean, they were just so wonderful, and to be in that kind of setting was so unique back then.
Well, I think it was different, and again the idea came from Oregon, from Sisters Oregon, who are this year I think celebrating their 45th year of the outdoor quilt show. I thought if they can hang them in the streets of Sisters, which is only a small town, it's only a town of about 3,000, but they have more than 3,000 people come in for the quilt show each year. And I just loved it. And I had this wonderful friend who at that time had a big garden up in Stirling, and we used to hang the quilts over the balcony. She had 6 kids at the time, because she was also involved in ASIAC and had adopted 4 overseas. And we hung quilts all around their rooms the minute they left for school or uni, and over the balcony. And I remember the first year I borrowed the frames from the Quilters Guild, and we had one of Josie Fred's beautiful hand-stitched quilts, and the breeze came up and it was in the garden in a flash. And so we learnt after that, ropes tree to tree, pegs, if it started to rain, just pull the quilts off. When Joan and Dean moved and became sick, we moved to my place, or to our place, and we had a bit of a tennis or a court area at the back, which was good for hanging quilts, and we just had quilts everywhere there. And when we first started, it was for Rest Haven, where my mother was in care for a long time, and they made all the scones. After my mum died, the fundraiser was for cancer, because my friends in Stirling had both died of cancer, and then while we were doing that, Faye and Joy would have a trading table in the backyard as well, and that was partly for, what was to become Bedford. And then we moved to here in Brighton. In fact, we hadn't expected to move so early. We had one planned for that very March, but the house was ready in February, and we couldn't. As you can see, a courtyard home doesn't lend itself to hundreds of people coming through. I used to have people who worried about the security of having, you didn't know who was coming to your home, but we had quilts hanging over every cover, every cupboard, if there was a place that we didn't want people to go, then we hung a quilt right across the front of that door, and we didn't see anybody flipping up and going in. And the people who supplied the quilts were all these people who were in my class, and they were also the helpers. And then, of course, I conned them into doing all sorts of things.
In fact, conning is a really good term to apply to you in the most positive way, because in the late 80s, early 90s, you, of course, initiated something that's now an integral part of the Guild, and that is Quilt Encounter. And if I listen to that team who've been with you for about 30 years now, I think they use that con word quite a bit.
They do, and they also say when I say I've had an idea, they all crumble because they know that means work, work, work for them, which they can't say no to.
Yeah,
But, I mean, they do it.
they do.
They're wonderful. You just have to have somebody who's bossy. There's lots of helpers out there.
Yeah.
Lots of people who don't want to be out. I never wanted to be. I've met somebody who knew me in my youth, and she can't believe it's the same person
Really?
that I'm up there out the front, because I was always out the back, still organising, but out the back.
But back to Quilt Encounter, can you tell us where you got that idea from and how it evolved in those early days?
Well, that was also from Oregon,
Mm-hmm.
because they used to have classes. Well, in 88, I think it was, I went to a quilt school in Seattle. And then the following year, I was invited to teach at Armidale. Do you remember?
Yes,
Barbara
I do.
Meredith had.
Yep.
I couldn't go the first year. I was in hospital. But I went the second year, and I still remember it, sitting at the table the first night, and these ladies saying, "Oh, you can tell the teacher's a mile off." And her friends kicking her under the table because she'd noticed I had Lessa Siegele tutor. That nobody on East Coast knew anything about Adelaide or any quilting activities here. They knew in that Barbara Meredith there were teachers from America and local teachers, and people came from all over Australia. There was an air pilot strike at that moment, and people had to come on devious bus routes from Western Australia to get there, and it was a week long, and then we did it a second week.
Okay.
So then I'd been to one. I went to Sisters in '89, and they had classes. This is Jean Wells,
Yes.
and now her daughter Valerie. And I thought, oh, that was a good idea. We could do that in Adelaide, because the cost of flying to Sydney then was I remember it was $495. 30 years ago, that's a lot of money.
It was.
So I thought, if we could bring the teachers to Adelaide, one airfare, and 15 of us don't have to pay an airfare. And so I don't know how we found that first venue at
It was the Red Shield.
the Red Shield,
a
Salvation
hostel.
Army. It was I think it was more for kids' camps. They were bunk beds.
I remember.
And the next morning, I believe everyone there snored, because the complaints we had at the table the next morning, and some ladies couldn't climb up into a top bunk. We had a quick learning. It rained on the weekend, and we had cords to, we need more power than most conferences with all our sewing machines. And Roger nearly had a fit that we had this power cord with, extension cord with a join running out in the yes. Anyway, we didn't blow the place up, but we went there for 3 years. The first year was just a weekend. It was full very quickly, and so the following year we decided we'd do weekend and a midweek, so that the workers and the non-workers could come. And I'm not sure when we started doing 4 days together. Or no, people started coming to both.
Right.
That's right, we did Saturday, Sunday, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, and we were there Monday. Well, then we started classes on Monday, and it just grew. And now, Karen, a lovely group, have taken this on. They have nearly more. The majority of people come for the whole time. Yes. I gather. Yeah.
Quilt Encounter's undergone a number of transitions, and I guess it's hard to actually recall when things happened and how. But you were very much involved in that for 20 years.
Yes, we decided about 18 years. The committee thought it was time to let some younger people take on with maybe some new ideas, different ideas, and it was a huge commitment.
Yes.
I mean, it was an all year round commitment. It wasn't just, and I don't remember the money involved, but it's frightening. But we had people on the committee I chose carefully for their skills. I had watched Helen Sparkman was the treasurer of the Quilters Guild. She seemed very adept. Other people I'd watched And I thought, yes, that we need them we need skilled people, not just a lot of friends.
Yes.
If you're running something of that magnitude, you've got to have skilled, not just somebody who's been pushed into volunteering.
Now, I don't think it was in those early years, but further down the track, Quilt Encounter started to have theme each year, didn't they?
Very early on.
Was it? Oh,
Yes.
I have no recollection of that.
Yeah, the very first year we had it. It was a beach theme. I meant to get out all the bags. I've still got them all. Mark Russell was.
I was hoping we'd get to Marg because she was very much a part of the guild as you were in those early days. For those that don't know, Marg is in care now.
Yes, she has dementia.
And you know, she's a sad loss to us all because she had such a sense of humour.
She still has a sense of humour, which is amazing. And I realise now, and I should have at the time because of my mother, my experience with my mother, that had started quite early, but she covered it with her humour. She'd say to somebody who came, "Oh, hello, are you new at Quilt Encounter?" And they said, "Oh, don't be silly, Mark, I'm Chris O'Brien." She had forgotten who it was, and that was her way. Yeah. But people loved her, and she was very creative. She was the one that came up with ideas. I don't know how we decided we'd have an idea of a theme, but you know, it started, and then her friend Pat Hagen used to do the first drawings for our theme. Now later on, Deb Nichol took over that, and then from once we had a theme, then her ideas just bounced on and on about what we'd do. I mean, can you remember when we dressed up in bathers? I think. One year when the Olympics were here, she had me dressed up in I think they were woolen shorts and a t-shirt, which and a singlet, which is not a great look on me. And I was supposed to be carrying the Olympic flame dashing across the stage. I've never moved so fast in my life. But the people loved it, and so we just kept on doing it because we only ever asked the committee to make a fool of themselves. We didn't ask
participants. But you must have some stories. I mean, have you got a funny tutor story? No names mentioned.
Well, we did have one tutor whose husband, she asked if it was all right if her husband came. They were from overseas, and we said yes. We found eventually, a bit hard at a ladies only quilt camp to find a bathroom for the man, but we found an ensuite. But the first day, the husband went into the classroom as well, but he was giving different instructions to the wife, which was confusing the students somewhat. And that is very tricky, trying to tell a teacher. That's not the right thing to do. And we had others, we had smokers. When we were at Emmanuel, it's a smoke-free campus, and we did have a few teachers who smoked, and that was a long walk up to the, late at night, up to Morford Road. They have to stand out on Morford Road having their little cigarette. But if you're a smoker, you're desperate, you do it.
Yeah. So along with that kind of story, do you have a favourite disaster story?
Oh, I guess. And I must be getting old. I can't remember her name for the moment. But her and her sister came, and they were older, and they hired a gopher for the time because it was a long way around the campus. But they weren't familiar with gophers. So one time she hit reverse instead of forward through the plate glass doors of the dining room. As quick as that, she fell forward again and was gone. And we don't really think she knew that she did it. I mean, it made a big noise, but she didn't seem to know. That was a little risky. Luckily, we had insurance.
That's good. What was some of your challenging management issues with Quilt Encounter? Was it about the diversity of people's diets or their weird demands?
We did have lots of things. By the time we were at Roseworthy College, which was wonderful, and then they couldn't commit to how many rooms we could have. Then we found it was hard finding venues for quilt shows. I mean, I went to one and they'd say, yes, they can have 15 in a room here, and I'd go and it'd be like 15 around a round table. Oh no, we need 15 tables for 15 people. So schools were ideal like that. But then we are demand. We need I approached a place in the Barossa, and it was a conference centre. Oh yes, they would be able to fix us, but the same thing. Their rooms were not. We have a very, and then I found a place that had the space, but it was upstairs. Well, my ladies can't carry sewing machines up and down the stairs, so Emmanuel was a lovely venue that was flat, and
it worked well.
it did work well, yes, until COVID came along and teaching has changed, and now the desks are low and things. It doesn't suit old ladies. We want lady up here, sewing machines, anyway.
Now, my takeaway message from your Quilt Encounter committee was that you forged enduring friendships. And so the story didn't end when you stopped doing Quilt Encounter, did it? No. You in fact became the Claytons Committee.
Yes.
Now I've had people say to me, what on earth is a Claytons Committee? So they're obviously way too young to have seen the TV ad. So do you want to explain about the Claytons Committee, where it got its name and what it does?
Well, Claytons, I think Kay Wilson said when she was at university she drank Clayton. She knew what it was. It was a non-alcoholic drink, and the ad was something about the drink you're having when you're not having a drink.
That's right.
So we were the committee you're having when you're not having a committee. And when we first formed that, I found a bottle of Claytons in our local supermarket store. It was a bit dusty, so I don't think it was, and I haven't looked. I meant to check that out to see if it still exists or not.
I bought a bottle a couple of years ago because I'd heard that story,
Yeah.
and it was in the supermarkets a few years ago, but no, I haven't looked since.
I haven't.
I think it tastes a bit alcoholic-y, doesn't it?
Yeah, I don't know what it was, but I don't know who came up with that idea either. But we had been together and we spent so much time together. I used to take them away every year, the committee, down to Port Elliot, and we'd have a sewing and just a fun time.
A few trips to America.
We did that when we finished. The year we finished and the new committee took over, we thought we shouldn't be around that first year for a new committee. That was not nice for them. And so I took them all to my sister. Well, 6 of us, I think, went. And Helen hired a van to get us around, and it was the time of the sisters' outdoor quilt show. So we took classes and we went to the outdoor show, which was lovely. And then a couple of years later, 3, I think, or 4, came with me when I went to Denver to record a program. So they're all very good friends with Helen as well now. And so when Helen comes, she's got to see all the Quilt Encounter people as well.
Now I'm going to digress because you've just raised the Denver issue. That links to something else that you're so well known for, and that is your recreation in a smaller scale of the Raja quilt.
Yeah.
So you were invited to go on to the quilt show.
Yes, yeah.
And that wasn't just it though. What did they ask you to do with the Raja quilt?
Oh, well, they asked if I do block of the month.
That's a significant honour, Lessa.
Yeah, well, I got into the Raja quilt because I had received the Raja Award for the Australian National, and I didn't know what the Raja was. I mean, it was the Raja Award, so I found out that was a quilt. I mean, it sounded like something from India. And I discovered it was this quilt made on the boat, Raja, coming to Australia. So I decided to make the quilt. But I got all the information, and it's held in the National Gallery in Canberra, and people said to me, you'll never be able to do that. So I put it off for ages. And then one day, you've got a bit of spare time, I'll do that. So I wrote to the National. I had a reply within about half an hour, that's all right. You can write a pattern for it and sell it. But the real quilt is
Enormous.
a very large quilt. So I've done it. So where the 2-inch squares, I did 1-inch squares. And that's how it's small now. I had earlier done an Australian, that's a Marjorie. She had loads of kids and made lots of quilts, and 3 or 4 have been in the mid 1800s in Australia. It happens to belong to a friend of mine, and so I made it, but not in traditional colours, just in blue and white, because lots of our quilting patterns are from America. So I thought, we have some quilts in Australia, we should have some Australian ones. So somehow the people in Denver found out Lilo, I never know how to say her Bowman. She contacted me and asked me would I come over there and make a program. You think, what? I mean, every experience I've had in quilting it's just bumped along, you know. You don't set out to do things, they just happen.
Which brings me back to the Claytons Committee, because you clearly had a focus with the Claytons Committee because of, I guess, the involvement of Faye and her daughter who was at Bedford.
Yeah.
So can you tell us how you got into the fundraising, but more importantly, how much money has the Claytons Committee raised? It's a staggering figure.
It is. It's over 300,000, and I have actually, Faye's away this week. She's better with the figures than me. When this house was not suitable for any more outdoor shows, I've had an idea, I said. And we all had lots of fabric, a little bit excess to our needs. And so we would cut a few. We knew that mystery quilts were popular because we'd done them at quilt camp since the second camp, I think. And people loved them. We did learn very early on there must only be background and contrast in mystery quilts. You can't have 3 things people there. I had one where it was background, something, and green. Well, I thought that was obvious, that had to be a flower, but no, people brought it. Anyway, we soon learned. And also when you have a mystery quilt, people don't want to go buy fabric, they want to use that in their cupboard. So anyway, so we all had fabric, we pulled it and we started cutting these mystery kits that we were selling. Well, it just snowballed.
In fact, I think Roger has kept track of how many metres you've cut. Do you know roughly where he got to last time he...
Well, I think it's over 6,000 metres of fabric.
Wow.
And if you think of that, but if you look in my shed, you'll know it's been there and gone through. And the money just happened. That first one, we thought, oh, well, you know, we used to make 5,000 or 6,000 at the quilt hangings. We'll, you know, if we do that, that'll be good. Well, I think the first year we did the mystery, because people kept ordering and then you'd keep cutting.
Yes.
I think it was over 15,000 or something. I don't remember. The last one, we did 4 of them. The third one was 75, and the fourth one was 103,000. As we got nearer the 100,000, oh, well, we cut some more, you know, we're going to make that 100,000. Because by then, Deb Nichol was out and about teaching, Faye was out and about, I was, and they were going all over Australia because people knew us through that. In fact, one lady sent back you know, the first year they'd buy one, then they'd tell their friends, and then, you know, by the 4th time, that lady's ordering, you know, 30 kits, right, and she's distributing. Yeah. So she sent us a photo. They were delivered on a pallet. So a big pallet and these 30 kits in the middle. I don't know why that happened. And then we weren't going to do it anymore. After that, I'd really worked them a little bit too hard that year. Well, we've still got fabric. We'll start making quilts for hospitals. And we made some for Mary Potter. And the next time Faye went to take in some, they were embarrassed to tell us that they were oversupplied and somebody else might like them. So Helen Sparkman, who lived in West Lakes, went to QEH, and now we have this wonderful connection with QEH Palliative Care Ward, and we make lots of quilts for them. And then somebody from RAH rang me, and not connected, but somehow knew I was quilter. Could I make some quilts? And I hesitated because we didn't want to not supply. But then she said, well, I said, oh, well, I come into the RAH regularly, and my doctor's Dr. Horvath. She said, oh, this is Dr. Horvath's home ward.
Oh,
Well, of course, I couldn't say no to that.
No.
And then a bit later, somebody from ICU, who I think is connected to the quilting world somehow, she got in touch with me. And so we also make for ICU at RAH, and there were quilts on the beds during COVID, and the man who was there the longest, you know, there was a little feature of him one night on the news, and we saw one of our quilts on his bed. So,
and then last year you took on...
Last year we took on Margaret Tobin ward at Flinders Flinders Hospital.
Which is a mental health.
Yes, it's a mental health, and they were, all the public hospitals have been so amazed to receive them. They know the system works and happens in private hospitals, but for for this in the public hospitals has been a great one. And donating to Margaret Tobin, they weren't sure, we weren't sure whether this would be useful, but they are thrilled with the reaction and the thing. As are the hospitals. I mean, I've been to a couple of morning teas at QEH and RAH with staff, and I'm surprised. I mean, it's the administrative staff, the nurses, even the doctors coming and saying what a difference that makes. Like the ICU, which we know if you're in ICU, that's, he said, to have something else to focus on, and it's more for, in ICU, it's more for the relatives than the patient doesn't really know at that stage that.
And I've heard people say that a quilt on a bed in that situation is a kind of point of starting a conversation. It's a kind of neutral. It's starting a conversation. And I guess we can't underestimate that.
QEH, there's a young lass there who delivers them to all the patients in normal times, not in COVID times, and she's kept a record of everyone and every quilt we've given, and she takes in, and I think this is, we tell other hospitals, they take in 3 or 4 to let the patient choose, and they never choose the one they think they would have given them, so that's always interesting. But we love doing that, and we'll keep doing it for as long. If you be loose in my house, in my cupboard, she would see stacks of quilts, because during last year in COVID, they weren't taking anything in. They have started again now.
Oh, that's good to know.
And so we had more time to make quilts, so we made more, and they took less, so the pile is a little bit high, and you don't want it sitting around the lounge room all the time. Roger's patient, but perhaps not that patient.
In fact, Roger has been a stalwart in your quilting journey. From a very early time, he's done your teaching notes with diagrams, and he's just been always there, always supportive.
Yes, he has. I mean, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. I mean, we do laugh when he's just discovered that he has an allergy, and he's worked it out. 50 years later, it's an allergy to fabric. Well, some days there's fabric from top. We cut in here, we cut in our place. There's fabric all over this house on cutting days, and yes, there is a lot of fluff. When they go home and I look at the floor, it's much worse than it is normally even. And he's good with, he and Lester Russell, you know, in 92 when we started Quilt Encounter, that was early years for the computer. And he learned the program, you know, to do lots of our stuff on the computer, and just he got better and better at it, and I didn't bother to learn. Oh,
and of course the other thing he's done.
Oh yes,
Roger has kept a record.
I don't know if you can.
Of every quilt that the Claytons Committee has made.
These are all the ones we've given away. Yeah. because even us, we forget what we've made.
Yes.
We look through them. And you have to remember this group, when we started in 1992, the youngest was 32 and Roma was 63, I think. She's now 93 shortly anyway.
This is truly a record of just a mind-boggling effort, isn't it?
Well, it's a fun way. We don't need any quilts. Every last relative and friend has got one or more, and they don't want any more. But we still like playing with fabric and playing with designs. And Kay Wilson's really good with designing things or seeing things and working it out. She's good at maths. She keeps us on the straight and narrow.
And of course, you mentioned your garage. Lessa's garage is the repository for anyone's fabric stash whose family don't know what to do with. And I have been in there at times when you can hardly get your car in.
Yes, well, luckily we only have one car and it's a double garage. Just this week, well, just after Christmas, a friend, a long-time quilting friend, she's not well, and Roger and I went up to clean out her sewing room because, and so I've come home with another lot, which I've sorted, but she made quilts. She's 90. She'd made quilts out of Australian fabric, just baby quilts, and they went into her op shop she works at in Handel.
Yes.
They have sold more than 60 of these. I mean, I said, Handel, why would you go into an op shop looking for a quilt? But I guess in Handel, you're walking up and down and you just
aren't you?
So she had one nearly finished. I said, I'll finish that for you. I came home and when I sorted the stuff, there were 4 more tops. So I quickly pinned them, and Kay Wilson took 2 and I took 2. We've quilted them, and just yesterday I took them up because I was going to just take them straight to the op shop, but her sister-in-law said she'd like to see them. So
how nice.
she doesn't have much time with us, so I raced them up there yesterday and now I'm working on, she had some other quilts that I'll work on and they'll become hospital quilts. Sometimes when people give us a top half done, I have to take a row off. You know, they like a specific size for the hospital, and so sometimes it means taking a row off there and adding it on, or just putting more borders to convert them. But so, you know, quite a few people give us quilts. I think they feel better. They're not just dumped.
Kathy here, Lessa. How many quilts would Claytons have made? Do you know?
Oh, more than 1,000. Last time I counted, it was about 1,100 and something. Somehow Roger's upset my counting technique. It used to be 25 or 20 on a page, and I used to just go, now some have 25 and some have 20. I have to be careful counting.
But how good that from the very early time he has kept
Well,
this
that's since
record.
2014 when we started making these. Yeah, so there's often a stack of quilts there. Faye has bought a long arm machine, and we love her to bits because now we all love mainly play. A couple of them are quilters, but we like mainly creating the tops, and so they go to Faye, she quilts them, and back they come, and off they go. So lots of the quilts were my teaching samples that I used to carry around forever and ever.
Lessa, if a guild were able to kind of elect or nominate an elder for the guild, I have no doubt that you would be the #1 nomination here in South Australia. You have been so sharing throughout your entire association with the guild, but you epitomise so many other wonderful things about who quilters are. You share your knowledge, you share your skills, you're very supportive of people who come to you with questions, concerns, but most importantly, I think you have set the guild on a track or a trail that has become integral to what the Quilting Guild is every day. You know, you started Quilt Encounter. We can't imagine life without Quilt Encounter.
Yeah.
You know, you got the workshops program up and running, and
but it was because of my experience.
Yeah.
I'd seen what had happened elsewhere, and I wanted us to have it
Yeah.
in.
And you've been incredibly
In South
successful in all of that. So, on behalf of every South Australian whose life you have touched, thank you so, so much.
Oh, yeah. You're very welcome.